to another episode where I get to speak to incredible people, leaders from around the world on my favorite subject, human-centered leadership, and what it is to be a leader in the 21st century in a post-COVID era. What is important? What does leadership look like? Have we adapted? Have we become more agile? Do we need to change our thinking? Well, today's guest hopefully will answer some of these questions. Today's guest is Patrik Wilkens, Vice President of the Soul Publishing, one of the largest digital media publishers in the world, providing entertainment and positive online content for more than 1 billion followers around the world. Now, that's pretty impressive to say the least. He's also founder of a company called Moneyball Consulting, which looks at transformation in more in the gaming industry and digital industry, helping with things like product management, gamification and optimization. I have no idea what that actually means. Interim management and coaching and programming and near sharing. Again, another phrase that's completely out of my brain. So firstly, Patrik, welcome to the podcast, and it's great to have you here.
Yeah, cool. Thank you very much. Really a pleasure to be on the podcast with you. Looking forward to it.
The first things first, I need to widen my knowledge. What on earth does gamification and optimization truly mean?
It's a good question. It's a question I think that's being asked many times. When you think about kids, in case you have some, or when you think about your own, childhood, I think it's incredible to see how fast people learn when the learning is fun. So for me, for example, I started to learn to type with 10 fingers based on writing cheat codes in Age of Empire 2. So that's kind of like got me writing, with 10 fingers. And I learned a lot of things about numbers and Excel sheets by playing some of the old web games, for example. And the reason why it's so native is because, gaming or gamification of tasks that are otherwise onerous with reward systems and with certain UI and UX implementations make things easier and faster to learn new subjects or get into new topics. So that's kind of like gamification in a nutshell.
Fascinating. I mean, that's a whole podcast episode just in that. We could really get into the neuroscience behind that, really. But I want to focus in on the work that you're doing with Soul Publishing. And, you talk about producing positive online content. Can you just give us an example of what that looks like?
Exactly. The Soul Publishing, we have over 1 billion followers across the globe. We produce a lot of entertaining and uplifting video content on over 25 platforms. So for example, if you go online on YouTube or you are on Snapchat, you're on TikTok, you're on Instagram, you'll be able to find our content. We have shows like 5 Minute Crafts, which is the largest DIY show on this planet. It has over 350 million subscribers and followers on YouTube alone. It's the only page actually that's in the top 10 for Facebook and in the top 10 for YouTube. So that's the kind of content that we are producing. We're trying to be inclusive, get the content to everybody. We are translating into 19 or 20 by now actually into 20 languages, and we make sure that this content is at its core, adding value to your life. It's positive, it's uplifting. It's kind of like your 10 minutes of happiness every day. Yeah.
I love that. And I think we need more of that, to be quite honest. Particularly in a post-COVID world, I think anxiety is still a predominant factor within society and within the organization, certainly that I work with. I work a lot with leaders, and anxiety really is prevalent in leadership at all levels. And I think to have some uplifting content really plays a part in society to combat this level of anxiety. In a post-COVID world, has your life changed? Has your pressures changed? Have your challenges changed?
It's really a good question, and I would have to think. I probably would give different answers, at different times throughout this interview as this question kind of like matures in my head.
Yeah.
Obviously, Corona was a massive impact on everybody, right? Including myself and my family. Things changed. Obviously, we had a different way of interacting with each other. We had a different way of seeing the families, a different way of seeing the friends. And also at work, right? We adjusted our approach. The Soul Publishing itself has been remote way before Corona actually hit. So that's a topic we can discuss separately. But I actually joined the Soul Publishing in 2020. So to speak, at the peak of the pandemic, moved the entire family from the Netherlands to Cyprus. So yeah, there was it was an adventure. And certainly an experience, and yeah, it did impact obviously myself and the people around me. On a management level, if we want to go into that, it also, I think, opened it up for many companies that the way that work has been done, like 50 years prior, is not something that can easily continue.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was a sea change for many organizations, wasn't it?
Yes, and I think it was like a catalyst. I've been subject to those conversations, many years before. People wanted more opportunities to work remote. People wanted to get rid of meetings. Again, I've been working in entertainment for 16 years, so I always had the opportunity and the privilege to work in a very kind of like forward-thinking environment. My mother, for example, she's been working 40 years in retail as a salesperson. These conversations did not cross her mind or the mind of her colleagues, and they wouldn't have been able to. But again, in this privileged position that many of our colleagues are in, that are in digital, obviously that has been discussed. And Corona made it a necessity, right, especially for the leadership of the various companies to enable that, because the alternative would have been to shut down the business. Yeah. And I think for many companies, especially in digital, especially in entertainment, it worked out very well. It was really an important proof of concept that people do work when they're not directly supervised. The quality of the content that's being put out has been consistently high. There was no dip in quality that we have seen. So yeah, I think again, Corona was a catalyst for that.
Did you find that whatever the outcomes and the output for Soul Publishing largely remained unaffected, because you guys, as you say, were already working remotely and you're in the online space already? But did you find that you and the senior leadership team had to start thinking differently for the staff that you had employed for yourselves in all of these countries?
Not really. I mean, obviously, every country experienced Corona in a slightly different way, and there were like local restrictions that we had to follow. But at the very core of our management philosophy, at the very core of our processes, nothing actually changed due to Corona.
Because you were already working remotely. That was your structure already.
Exactly. So the Soul Publishing made a conscious and proactive decision before Corona happened to become a global company, to become a digital first company, to become a company that is embracing asynchronous communication, that is embracing no meeting policies, that's enabling people to work everywhere in the way that they want to work. So that is our culture. That was a decision that we did again prior to Corona. So therefore, Corona did not really impact how we're doing things. It certainly impacts the conversations that we're having, because like now a lot of companies, and a lot of friends in other companies having conversations with us, asking us for our experiences and stuff.
Yeah, I was just going to come on to that, Patrik, really, because if you think about it, what you're essentially saying is that, Soul Publishing was already future-proofed. So while ever there was very little impact on yourselves, and you might be thinking, well, actually, this is quite normal for us. I think you're out on your own, really, because you must be one of the tiny percentage of countries that were already prepared for this eventuality. So many other countries out there, and many of the client organizations I work with, Patrik, are still struggling with this concept of remote working, of hybrid working. I have been consulted by companies who really want to bring their employees back to work and get back to working in a way that's much more comfortable for them, that they're more used to. What is your message there to these kind of companies?
To the companies that are considering bringing the people back to the office. It wouldn't be something that the Soul is doing for sure. I think the important question is, what's kind of like the baseline, what's the philosophy of those companies?
Yeah.
I know many people, and I had many conversations with people that don't want to go back to the office, that appreciate the freedom that they received over the last couple of years, and also the trust that they received over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And I know that there is a percentage of people, even in this environment today, where there have been mass layoffs in tech, obviously, but there are people still today that would rather change the job to stay remote than going back to the office.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the drivers behind things like the Great Resignation, and and people now taking industrial action. It is about they're not happy with their working conditions, and when they don't feel trusted. Some people I have known of people who have left organizations completely, even with no job to go to, because they are unhappy with the work environment, and they think, well, you know what, I will find a job elsewhere. I know I will, that will be better suited to my values. So I think values has become a really, really big thing since 2020. I think, people have recalibrated their priorities because we're so close to death, because death was something that was being talked about so much in 2020. I think people started thinking deeper and asked themselves, what's important for me as a human being? First, and then an employee second. So many of these organizations are saying, well, hey, we've seen things in the media where some big organizations say, hey, we want to bring our people back to work now. We want to get back to normality. Well, I'm not entirely sure what normality is anymore.
I think that's the key, right? Like, whatever your definition of normal is, you might want to go, or you might have to go back to an office environment, kind of like 9 to 5, sitting in the office, running into meetings and doing things the way that you've done them for the last 50 years. And then for visual publishing, obviously, normal has always been no meetings, asynchronous communication, people working wherever they like to be. They're working towards a common goal rather than having their keystrokes, measured and controlled. For us and for me in particular, it's all about the results. There are multiple ways of getting there. Different people have different approaches. That's all fine as long as in the end you have a great product. I do think visual publishing we have been, we've been delivering, and I do think we're going to continue to deliver. We had over 200 billion views, for example, in the last year. So
incredible.
It's the first company in the world that actually reached these numbers as early as October in 2022. So people appreciate the content we're putting out, and I do think our colleagues appreciate the environment that we're providing for them, especially because there are a lot of young people, there are a lot of creative people. We have quite a few people that had their very first job with us, right? They've been growing with us. So, providing an environment of trust, of mentorship, of support that allows them to live the life that they want to live, and at the same time delivering the product and the videos and the uplifting content that they would love to do. I think that's a great position to be in, and we're happy to deliver that to our fans, but also.
I'm really inspired. I'm really inspired by what you're saying because we started off talking about remote working, which of course is important because this is the way of the world right now. We are in this digital world. We have things like this software that we're using right now, and many, many more besides, which give us the ability to connect globally through digital media and digital means. But I think if you take it to the next level, one of the downsides of working remotely, I'm sure you would accept, is this whole concept of isolation and fragmentation, possibly within teams. Teams might not be as cohesive because everyone's working in their own little room somewhere far removed from the other person. So where you've taken it to the next level with Soul Publishing is this building of trust as a foundation. And I talk about this all the time, that all great organizations, all high-performing organizations will have one thing in common. They will have a foundational stone built on trust, where they trust their employees. They're not measuring, and you say that we're not measuring keystrokes because that would be a good measure for a digital organization, but we're not measuring the output as such from individual employees. We are focusing on the big picture, i.e., are we hitting our outcomes where they need to be as an organization? I love that. So that also suggests to me that there's no blame culture within Soul Publishing as well, i.e., there's no finger pointing at individuals. Am I right, or am I just, looking at the cloud pig fluffy, sort of environment?
No, I don't think there is. I don't think there's a blame culture. I do think there is a very straightforward culture of saying if something is not working and pointing it out. I wouldn't, I know that finger pointing has a negative connotation to it. I'd rather, would consider that to like a football team, right? If you're defender or if you're midfield or your fast forward is doing something that's not in line with the strategy, or it's not in line with your belief and your philosophy, it's the right environment to point it out and to suggest things to get better. So this we certainly have, but finger pointing for the sake of finger pointing or blaming, I think that's unproductive. I don't know what the point could be for somebody to do that. And certainly I'm happy that I don't see that at the Kul Publishing at all.
We talk about finger pointing. I want to just use slightly different language because, for me, when you're saying that, I hear accountability and I hear healthy conflict debate. Yeah. And it was a conversation I was having when I was talking to a group of leaders at a university yesterday. We're having exactly this conversation. We're talking about only when you have this solid foundation of trust can you actually have healthy conflict debates. And conflict conversations are important in the workplace. If we don't have those difficult conversations, if we're not having those in the workplace, then what essentially is happening is that people are shying away from the elephant in the room. And if the elephant in the room doesn't get addressed, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And at some point, it's going to explode. And when you do have healthy conflict, then you feel much more able to hold each other to account as well. So while you might not be measuring the outputs from the individuals, you can still hold them to account and say, hey, you're supposed to have done this, or you promised to do this, but it's not been done. Without any sense of blame being apportioned. I think that's a subtlety.
And I do think that our no meeting policy, for example, or our, we have a few other policies in place to support asynchronous working. Our no meeting policy really supports that. When I do come up with an idea, or my teams come up with an idea, I do communicate that in written form, right? Yeah. I put it out there for everybody to see, for everybody to review, not in kind of like a 10-minute time frame where I keep, pushing and keep talking down on everybody, so to speak, or over everybody to kind of like get my message across, but in an environment where everybody feels comfortable, right, in their own preferred place, reading up on an idea that I might came up with, and then having an ability to actually comment on it, and having also the time to think about the reply. So, everything is documented, everything is available, everything is transparent. So a lot of the negative parts of office politics are simply prevented just by the form of communication that we've chosen. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind when you think about asynchronous communication, when you think about no meetings, when you think about what all the positive effects are of that.
Yes, and this whole concept of meetings, and I'm glad you've mentioned the no meetings policy that you have within Soul Publishing, because it is an area that's really intrigued me. Many years ago, I was head of corporate services in a police service, head of organizational development in essence, and I measured the cost of meetings, particularly the strategic meetings with senior leaders around the table. And many of these meetings, Patrik, we had they were standing agenda items, they were penciled in, they were absolute monthly meetings. And I wondered, how much business are we actually doing there? So I calculated everybody's hourly wage. I calculated the time of the meeting, and we came up with a ballpark figure. This meeting is costing us X thousands of pounds. Yeah. And then we asked the question, have we done X thousands of pounds worth of business? And very often, because we just had standing agenda items, we hadn't. There were no real actions coming out that were moving us forward. But you've taken this to a whole new level at Soul Publishing, and I love it. I'm really, really intrigued by this. So you've introduced a no meetings policy. Do you want to just explain why that happened, how that came about, and how it works?
Yes. around 2019, when we thought about, like the way that we want to work, we also thought about that meetings are not in our best interest. I do believe that banning meetings is overall, or in general, like a human-centric approach, where you put the person into the middle of it and then everything else around it. When you ban meetings, you give people the autonomy to work wherever they want in whatever time zone, because you do not force them into rigid process structures, for example. You, again, by having no meetings does not mean that we're not communicating, right? On the contrary, it's not like, this company has no meetings, they don't need to talk about anything. We talk a lot, but we do not talk in the close confines of a meeting, which, to be honest, even while that meeting is taking place, in many circumstances, there are no meeting minutes that are being written for other people to check, right? In most cases, they're not recorded. So these meetings are basically happening behind closed doors, and then you need to rely on everybody to actually communicate. We are just removing that step. We are directly communicating with everybody. We're putting our thoughts, into a system called Confluence, which is basically like a wiki, or kind of like a board system. And everybody can read up on it, who feels that this information is important to them, and that delivers a level of transparency, that delivers a feeling of trust, and it also again removes that constraint that comes with meetings. And to your point, when you calculate the costs of a meeting, when you have 5, 6, 7 people in that meeting, the costs are very significant, especially when you consider that recent surveys suggest that over COVID, around 18 hours of a week are being spent in meetings. That's nearly half your productivity. So the meetings have to be tremendous and super productive in order to justify that amount of time allocation. And often, let's be honest, they're not.
I'm really intrigued by this, Patrik. And, I'm writing a book called The Art of Human-Centered Leadership. One of the paragraphs is going to be on meetings. So don't be surprised if I just turn up at your doorstep and wanting to have another conversation with you, because I think this is a really, really good case study in terms of what you have achieved at Soul Publishing. And I take my hat off to you, because this is the kind of courageous steps I think we need to have in a post-COVID world. I think leaders need to be courageous enough to stop doing the things that we traditionally have done in organizations and have the courage to do something completely different. And we were talking, before you came on, I was talking to Sam, your Director of Communications. We're talking about diversity and inclusion. And my view on diversity inclusion is that, everyone's chasing representation. We need to have X percentage of this, X percentage of that, X percentage of such another. But the truth of it all is, if the company culture isn't ready to accept these individuals and allow them to speak with a voice that has made them a minority community, then actually you're not being inclusive at all. So we need to be courageous with all of these traditional things that we've always done and do things differently. And you've exemplified that perfectly with meetings. One of the things that I'm hearing an awful lot about when it comes to meetings from so many of my clients, and I know work predominantly with leaders in organizations, most leaders are saying is, if we thought meetings were bad before COVID, they are 10 times worse after COVID, because what's happening now is, with remote working, we are literally having meetings penciled back to back into our diaries. So we go from one meeting at 11 o'clock, which finishes at 11 o'clock, and the next meeting starts at 11 o'clock. We literally have no time for respite. So not only are you building trust in your organization by having this transparency that you talk about with meetings, but also you're preventing fatigue in your organization. You're preventing meeting fatigue in your staff across Soul Publishing, which I'm really, really, inspired by. I think it's great. Have you seen any difference since 2019 as a result of introducing this idea?
Me personally, I joined in 2020. So for me, it was very natural to, or since then it was very natural, right? Like the whole organization was already on board, or is already on board with that. What I did see, what I did experience, obviously I worked in other organizations before that did not have those no meeting policies. And I've seen myself, I liked meetings. I liked to sit in a room of people and share my vision and to get this connection, this rah-rah moment to like push an idea forward, and coming into an organization where that is not the norm and not encouraged, where it's not about the charisma of your leader, or the language abilities, or other factors, but it's about the quality of the message. That obviously required me to change my approach, and it took 3-4 months to really get behind, right?
Yeah, because of course you're changing a whole way of being, right? Because this is so unheard of.
And what made it really easy for me was the clear message from the company. It just does not happen, Patrik, right? You do not do meetings to get your point across. And that was either you embrace it or you don't, right? It's not for everybody, 100%. I agree on this one. It's not easy, neither. I'm not saying that. But once, and again, that's to the credit of the Soul Publishing's leadership team, has been always very clear. You do not do meetings. You communicate via Asana, which is our project management tool. You communicate via Confluent, which is the wiki that I just mentioned. Or in some urgent cases, you communicate via Slack, giving everybody the time they need to digest the content. You get a whole new level of questions in response, and therefore you need to adjust your writing style. In a meeting, let's be honest, how many times did we experience really organizational changing, product changing questions? I don't think that meetings, how they've been done or how they're being reintroduced nowadays, are the best basis for those conversations. People usually go into meetings, A, they don't want to be in meetings, B, maybe they're only necessary in a 60-minute meeting for like 5 minutes.
Yes.
They wonder what they should do the rest of the time. They're already thinking about the meeting afterwards. They usually don't prepare well for the meeting that they're in the first place, because there's no time, because like you mentioned, they're back-to-back meetings, right? When should they do that?
Yeah.
So again, removing these obstacles and focusing on the core of what the business is, what the product is, what you want to achieve, I do think is supported by no meeting policy. It's supported by writing things down rather than talking about it and then forgetting about it and having the next meeting a week later to be reminded what the agenda was in the first place. I just don't think that's the.
When you put it the way that you put it, Patrik, it just makes perfect sense. You've highlighted all the things, the challenges that people go through when they go to meetings. This idea of somebody may only have a 5-minute contribution in a meeting, and then for, 55 minutes, what are they going to do, and how much do we really get out of meetings? And of course, in a post-COVID digital world, it's back-to-back meetings and meeting fatigue and all of these kind of things. And of course, on top of that, previously you had talked about the transparency and the trust. All of these fantastic philosophies that you have put forward just makes so much sense to me in what I would deem as a human-centered organization, and that's sort of what your driver is, isn't it? You've mentioned having a human-centric culture, and I think that is the driver, and you've demonstrated by focusing on your people, it has not affected your overall performance in a bad way. Actually, it's driven the performance up. So all of these organizations and leaders out there that very often ask me, okay, so if you were to help us with our people-centered initiatives and skill sets, how does that equate to tangible outcomes? And it's always a question that's really hard because you have to take a leap of faith, don't you? And I think that's what Soul Publishing has done. It's taken a leap of faith, but it's proved worthwhile for you. So what would you say to, any of the leaders might be listening to this and saying, okay, so what Patrik is saying is take some big steps forward, some really big, courageous steps forward, but I'm not sure I can do that. I'm not sure if there's going to be a tangible outcome. What would you say to them to inspire them?
Yeah, first of all, I would agree with them. It takes a lot of effort, and it takes a very big step, and it takes courage to actually implement these things, especially when your organization is not used to it. You need to make sure that you as leadership are of one mind and that you do agree that you're aligned. I think that's really important. You need to get your mid-level managers to be on board, and you need
100%.
to really push it through. There will be questions. There are going to be concerns. You could probably discuss that subject for 5 months, for 10 years even, and not make a decision because there's so many points. But you could also, write a Confluence post about it, what your logics and what your, thoughts are, what you believe can happen, and then everybody can comment on it. You listen to it, and if you still feel that this is the right move forward, and if everybody had a chance to kind of like voice their concerns or give suggestions on how to improve, and you incorporated those recommendations, then I do think you should do the leap of faith, and start rolling it out, and don't spend 6 months on it, spend 3 months on it, right? Make it time constrained. It's going to be crazy. A lot of people are going to complain about it. When I actually joined the Soul Publishing, we had another project management software that we used. It was an older system. It worked very well for us to get us from where we started in 2016 to then 200 billion views, but it wouldn't help us to reach the next level. So the organization started a research into new tools, and we came up with a tool. I don't want to make any advertising here. I mean, it's obviously the tool we're using, but so we came up with a tool. We use Asana. Then we rolled it out over 3 months, and that was my first months in the organization. I thought it's crazy. I did not believe that it can be done, because I've been in other organizations before that have been agile, that have been, digital, that have been forward thinking, great organizations, and it would have not been possible in 3 months. And what I realized is, by putting that constraints on it, by simply saying that needs to be done in 3 months, I was so surprised by the managers, right, and by the teams. They really, they really rose up to the occasion, so to speak. They really delivered.
I think one of the, if we're to have final comments and final wisdom from you, I think the key message here is that, this is about transformation and change, right? Whatever the issue is, this is about transformation and change. And in order for us to transform and change in an organization, we need to have, first and foremost, we need to have courage. But we also need to build on a foundation of trust, which you've established anyway in Soul Publishing. That's probably why it was that bit easier for you. But thirdly, you mentioned something there, which I think is absolutely critical in any kind of change. And I see this is where it fails in so many organizations. The senior leadership team have to have the buy-in of the middle managers, the middle leaders in the organization, because they are the ones that have connection to the front line. They are the ones that take your message and make that message come to life, in essence. So I see this happening in so many organizations where the executive arm of the organization has a phenomenal idea, but because they A, don't have the trust and confidence and the relationship with the middle managers, and B, they haven't communicated it correctly, that's where the stumbling block is, and that's where you don't get the 100% buy-in. So consequently, what comes out is a dilution of the original message.
And I think this is where it really helps to not just make middle-level management feel like they're part of it through some managerial trick or some, like PR campaign, but make them part of the process. When you do talk about no meetings, when you talk about using asynchronous communication, you will write an article, you will write a thought, and it's not the final thought that you can put in a newspaper, right? It is work in progress, and everybody sees it is work in progress. Everybody sees it's not perfect. Everybody sees that, recommendations are being listened to, they're being incorporated into the program. So everybody who's really interested can participate, not just in the execution of it, but in the conceptualization of it in the very initial meetings. And when you would have meetings only, let's talk about C-level management gets together, the VPs get together. Those are usually not the meetings that other mid-level managers, or again, everybody, right? I'm not just talking about the mid-level managers. When we publish something, we have 2,500 colleagues. 2,500 colleagues can read and comment on it. So And that is really this crucial step that helps you to get everybody aligned. And also it helps by saying, guys, you've been part of that process. You could have contributed. You, for reasons, did not. That's fine. But now don't be the blocker, right? Be part of the solution. Don't become a problem. That's part of our company culture. That's what we ask in return, right?
Yeah. And you know what? There is so much wisdom in this one podcast. Patrik, I want to thank you. I've really enjoyed listening to you. I think we're going to have a longer conversation in the future. There is no doubt about that. I want to feature the work that you're doing in self-publishing in the book that I will be writing later on in the year. But thank you so much for being on the show. I really do appreciate it. Thanks for taking time out all the way from Cyprus.
Cool. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.